most of the advice that you've heard on this really important topic has either probably been impossible to implement or just wrong.
A lot of figure drawings don't have the figure balanced. I've done millions of drawings like that, and it feels weird for the viewer. So let's get your figure drawings balanced. And the really cool thing is that often being confident with these ideas is going to let you capture gesture more effectively as well. My name's Kenzo, and this is Love Life Drawing.
So the most common advice about this is to locate the center of gravity in the pose, bring down a vertical line from there, and orient the figure's weight around that line. And that sounds really good because that's a good way to think about how balance works. But in practice, where is the center of gravity? How do we locate it? The standard advice is mostly wrong, but fortunately, there is a simple solution that we're going to go over in this video.
So just to be more specific, rather than the center of gravity, what we really care about for drawing is the line of gravity. So rather than one specific point, we really just need the vertical around which the weight is distributed. And that's cool because that's a little bit easier to locate. So you might have been told to create a drop line from the nose. Maybe the weight will be centered around that line, or from the ear, or from the middle of the collarbones, or just behind the belly button, or from the anterior side of the S2 vertebrae. They're all useful ideas, they're all wrong. And they're useful because using any type of vertical drop line is a great start for figuring out balance, especially if that drop line passes through a clear-cut landmark where you have no doubt where it is. For me personally, the middle of the collarbones is the most useful of these, but actually they're all wrong because the line of gravity doesn't necessarily pass through any of these points. If it's a balanced standing pose, the line of gravity won't be outside the person's feet. But here you can see that the line is outside the people's feet. These people would be falling over with these different points. No single point can consistently be right because the center of gravity moves in different poses.
So at this point, we kind of have two options. On the one hand, we could chop the person up, weigh all the parts, and then do some complex maths to figure out where the center of all that weight is in that pose. Or we could use the really easy way that I'm about to show you. Now, I don't know about you, but I think it'd be really awful to have to do any maths. So we're going to go with the easy way, and it's all about first figuring out, is the weight mostly on one foot or distributed across both feet?
If the weight is mostly on one leg, then the line of gravity will pass through the supporting foot. It could be more towards the front or the back of the foot, but somewhere in that area. So you can bring a vertical up from the weight-bearing foot and see what's on each side of that line. So in Christie's pose here, we have the weight on this foot and we bring up this vertical. His leg is raised, so instead of being a support, now his leg is just a weight and it's on this side of the line. His arm and his head are on this side of the line too. And to compensate, he's shifted his torso out a bit to the right-hand side. And there's a lot of weight in the trunk, so a whole leg sticking out this way could be offset by a smaller shift the other way in the hips and in the torso. Because his torso moved this way, his weight-bearing leg is now on this strong diagonal. If we drew this pose without thinking about these things, we could easily off-balance him. So if we didn't have that leg on the diagonal in our drawing, there'd be a lot on the left-hand side of the vertical from that weight-bearing foot, and he'd be falling over. If we didn't have that bend in the torso, so we didn't bring his head and his upper torso back towards the other side of the line, there'd be too much on the right-hand side and he'd fall over that way. So as you get more confident with using this line, you can start emphasizing interesting things about the pose. And then this idea of balance is going to tie in really closely with your gesture skills. Okay, so standing on one leg was pretty simple. So what if the person has both feet down, but the weight is shifted to one side? So quite often the weight is shifted almost entirely to one leg, like in this pose. Now, how do you know that the weight is all on one leg? You can imagine doing that pose and think about whether there would be any weight on the other foot. Would you easily be able to lift it up off the floor? You can also even look at their leg to see is there any tension in their muscles to see if there's any weight on that leg. So here, even though both her feet are down, we can treat it the same as when the person was standing on one leg, with a vertical from the weight-bearing foot. And I think in this pose, the leg is more of a weight than a support. When we draw this pose, we want to ensure that we orient her forms around this vertical. So here's one last pose where the weight is shifted to one foot. Now the weight is on this foot, we can use the vertical. Now when both feet are down, but the weight is shifted to one of them, it's useful to note what happens. So the weight has shifted over this foot, so now the leg has to angle in under the weight to create that diagonal. And in this pose, the side of the pelvis is pushed up by that weight-bearing leg. That doesn't always happen, but it's really useful to draw that when it does happen. And then this has a knock-on effect on the other leg and the torso. So now, because the hips have shifted this way, the other leg has further to go to reach the floor. So the person might bring that foot in closer, or in this case, the foot is staying where it was, and to reach the floor, he has to point his foot and only the toes touch the ground. Also, this side of the pelvis is now angled down, which helps as well. Because of the angle of the pelvis, now the lower torso is kind of going off in this direction. But if it keeps going in that direction, the weight won't be over this leg anymore. So to keep the balance on that leg, the torso angles back again. And that means a bend in the torso, and we can see a squash and a stretch. When the feet are next to each other, then again you can look at a vertical coming up from the feet. So here's a pose from the side where the feet are together and the weight needs to be over the feet. She doesn't feel like she's really back on her heels or on her toes, so I'm guessing her weight is mid-foot. So it's super useful to see this line and think about the balance around that line, because so many people are going to see the backwards lean of the torso and draw that, but they'll miss how the pelvis was pushed forward to counterbalance it and the resulting angle in the legs, and you don't want to miss that. The more the person is leaning back, the more their hips will push out the other way, and you want to get both movements to keep the balance and that angle of the legs. And that's going to set your drawings apart from 90% of the ones out there. Now, if the weight is distributed across both feet that are spread apart, then it's usually way easier to make the pose feel balanced. The line of gravity needs to fall somewhere inside the feet, and you might get it a bit wrong, but it still won't feel like the figure would fall over as long as it's still in that area. In that case, it's super important to get the ground plane right. So if one foot is further back, there's going to be a diagonal between the feet, and you want to capture that. If you lose that diagonal, which is really common, then it doesn't feel like the person is going to be standing on real ground. The diagonal will create a negative space shape under the legs, which can also be useful. And when the legs are apart, it can be useful to look for the vertical lines down from the crotch and from the middle of the collarbones. And that way, you can relate the top and bottom of the torso to the legs. Now, once you establish that there's one leg further back, try to bring in some additional clues for the viewer so they can understand that this leg is back. For example, with cross contour lines that show that the leg is receding in space. And then they'll know why there's that diagonal between the feet, because that's further back on the ground plane. Now finally, getting that contact point between the feet and the floor right is super important. That makes it clear that they're on solid ground and they're not floating. Now I have a whole other video planned for you guys about how to establish that sense of weight in the drawing coming soon. I want to make sure you knew that we offer a lot more than just these awesome tutorials. We have a free reference library, a free figure drawing challenge that is transformative for your skills. It's really powerful. We also have a PDF guide that helps you assess your skills to see what you need to work on next. So all of that is linked below. Check it out and get yourself some cool stuff.
What video is up there? Because if you're watching this a few weeks after I post it, it should be a video about the sense of weight, super important. But if you're watching before then, it'll be another video that YouTube says is best for you, so check it out.